Welcome back, everybody, to the Across the Sky podcast, our Lee Enterprises weather podcast, diving into all sorts of fun, good, informative, serious, you name it, you got it, topics here across the weather world. We are here today with, what are we saying, 3/4 of our Lee Enterprises weather team. We have Matt Holliner in the Midwest. We got Sean Sublett in Richmond. Kirsten in Tulsa, unfortunately, cannot be with us today, but Sean, Matt, how's it going, guys?
Man, it's really good here in Virginia. I know we record these things a little bit ahead of time, but it's fair to say that we've got the first legit hot spell on the way here to the Commonwealth.
And we're not too far behind you with you there in Jersey. I think we're looking at 90s just like you are.
Oh, yeah.
So definitely sizzling. Matt, you've had experience with hot weather in many years of your life, but not so much in Chicago, right?
I'm really looking forward to this summer in Chicago. You know, before I got this job, I was down in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. Those were some brutal summers. I grew up in San Antonio, which is just a little bit north of the valley, and those are some brutal summers. So this is probably going to be, at least I hope, my nicest summer yet. And I think I've earned it after my worst winter ever.
I think you have. I never been to Chicago during the summer, but everyone always says they're very nice. So as long as you don't get that lake breeze, I guess that cools things down a little bit.
Yeah, that's the refreshing part. You get those cool waters off of Lake Michigan. Now it can be rough in the winter when you get that wind off the lake, but in the summer, that's the refreshing part. That's what keeps it feeling good.
And our guest here knows a lot about hot weather because he too also lives in the South. We are here with Matt Lanza, who is the lead meteorologist for Cheniere Energy in Houston, and that's where he lives. He's also the managing editor for Space City Weather. So Matt is a really interesting person to have on here because we're going to talk about three different things with Matt. We're going to talk about the summer forecast ahead. Then we're going to talk about his work in the energy sector, but we're also going to talk about his work with Space City Weather because, like us, Matt is working in this digital space. He's been doing it for a while, really good at it. And I think he's a great person to have on. And plus, Matt and I we go back. We have many similarities. Won't get into that just yet. But we have crossed paths in our lives. So, Matt, thanks for joining the Across the Sky podcast.
Thank you for having me, Joe. Yes, we do have some things in common that we can go back to for sure.
No one can see the background behind you. We have a Rutgers basketball there. So that's one of the things. But you've been in Houston for a while now. So do you want to be like Matt sometimes and have that Chicago kind of summer as opposed to the Houston one?
There are moments. Like you hit a point where it's just like, boy, it would be nice if I could work like the winter months in Houston and the summer months in, I don't know, Calgary, Chicago, Minneapolis, somewhere to the north. It gets a little tiring, but the cold's a little tiring too. So, pick your poison, I guess.
So Matt, let's start off by talking about the summer forecast. It's some of what you do with Cheniere in Houston here. From a top level view, right? We're covering the whole country, but what can you tell us about the summer that's coming up here?
This is going to be like the funny sounding answer, but it's probably going to be hot, which is what most people would say. Yeah, exactly. But when you say hot and you're a meteorologist and you're doing forecasting, you actually mean it's probably going to be hotter than normal. And so, that sort of gets you to the next level. I even saw, I believe it was the National Weather Service put out their summer forecast either today or yesterday from our recording, and it's going for pretty much the entire country being above normal. I don't see anything wrong with that, and that's kind of where I'm leaning as well, that it's probably going to be a hot summer. There'll be a couple interesting things I think to follow this summer in addition to the heat, and that will be drought across the middle and western parts of the country, and also hurricane season, which can be a wild card for determining if we can get some cooler weather for a time in parts of the country as well, depending on how the storms tend to track. But yeah, heat, plenty of it.
Heat and plenty of it. And I believe, Sean, right? You did a hurricane season outlook for Richmond.com, right?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the upcoming hurricane season, and there's a lot of well-documented evidence about something that I think a lot of people are beginning to become familiar with, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We're in the La Nina phase of that, really almost going into the third consecutive hurricane season in a La Nina pattern. And basically, that cuts down on the amount of shear in the tropics, basically winds going at different directions with height. and that tends to cut back on the chances that a hurricane can get torn apart. So that's a third season in a row like this. So yeah, Matt, when you look at that, and I know you can't give away but so much for proprietary reasons, but in the broader scope, we look at hurricane season one way in terms of a full on season forecast and also for a full season of just temperature and precipitation across North America. What kinds of things are you quasi at liberty to discuss other than for these kinds of outlooks, other than just ENSO?
Yeah. And what I like to tell people is that when you're making forecasts in that kind of time period, that sort of, 2, 3, 4 months out, people like kind of look at you like you have 6 heads sometimes, and they're just like, can you get the weather right next week? How can you do a seasonal thing? But the reality is it's a different kind of forecasting, right? Because you only have certain things you can look at. And I like to say it's more art than science, because what you're trying to do is you're taking all this data to try and find, there's different ways you can make a forecast. And one of the ways I like to do it is to try and find analog years. In other words, look back at what has happened over the last 3 to 6 months in various parts of the globe that are important, such as ENSO, such as the polar regions, some of the water temperatures in both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, things like that. And, look at how the data has been for the last 3 to 6 months, and then go back in history and say, okay, well, what years saw this happen similarly, or as similar to this as you can find. And the more boxes you can check for a particular year, the more often that year comes up, the more likely you are to say that, well, that might be a decent analog to this year. So what happened that summer? Let's go back and look. Now, the challenge, I think, today in terms of that process is, number one, as we deal with changes in the climate, you start to deal a little bit with some of these relationships maybe not working as well as they used to in the past. So what looked like it worked well in, say, 1972 doesn't work as well in 2022, because those relationships don't hold up as much. And so, and the baseline is going to be a little hotter anyway. So I try to focus mostly on the last 20 or 30 years to try and find, really good years to look at for, just different things. And it's just a lot of data nerd stuff, looking at different values of things, and then just basically taking a paintbrush based on that data and making a picture of what summer could look like.
Yeah, I hear you. And it's tricky. It's kind of more art than science. But the other thing is that it's tougher to get better at it quickly, because you're only doing it for a season at a time, as opposed to daily, which we do in the more regular operational forecasting business. Matt, what kind of things have you seen there about hurricanes and the summer outlook? Hollander. In Chicago.
What's the problem when you're dealing with 2 Matts?
Chicago Matt.
Yeah, this gets confusing.
Yeah.
With the 2 Matts. But one thing I've been seeing is that it looks like, it's going to be very similar to what we've been seeing the last 3 summers. I mean, this is just kind of becoming a routine thing where most of the country is going to see above normal temperatures. I mean, that's almost a guarantee now, it seems like, with climate change. I remember the last summer where it was particularly cool. And then also, these active hurricane season, I mean, La Nina playing a big role with that. But I think that's the thing that sometimes gets forgotten a little bit. Sometimes we think about, the influence La Nina had, as it certainly does on hurricane season. But as far as when it comes to temperatures, you don't see the temperature influence so much in the summer months. It seems to have a bigger impact in a winter month. So La Nina definitely playing a role for when it comes to hurricanes, and maybe influencing the amount of precipitation we're going to see in the southeast and east coast. Because it tends to lead to a more active hurricane season. But it doesn't seem like La Nina has much of a temperature influence during the summer months like it does in the winter.
Yeah, it's definitely a stronger winter correlation. And what you'll find is, one thing that I found that has kind of been fascinating to me, and maybe it's obvious now after doing this for a number of years, but it was fascinating, at least initially, to see how much stronger so many different correlations are in the wintertime than they are in the summertime. Like sometimes in the summertime, you're like pulling teeth to find something that works as a correlation, or to find an analog or whatever. So it's definitely a lot more difficult. The La Nina story is definitely an interesting one, because you're correct about the precipitation, and especially here in Texas, we deal with a very good correlation typically between drier years and La Ninas. And that has been no exception this year, with a lot of Texas now in extreme or exceptional drought, as well as a lot of the plains for that matter. At this point in time now, it looks like we're going to get a little bit of relief going into the next week or so here in Texas from this recording. So that'll be great. But the last couple of years, I mean, as Sean alluded to, this is like the third year in a row that we've had a La Nina. So it's kind of a miracle that we haven't gone into a bad drought yet because of that correlation. So, the fact that we're kind of stepping to that now is not too much of a surprise. And it'll be interesting to see if we can, get a little bit of relief over the next week or so, if that will come back again at some time later in June or July to help us, get some relief down here. Otherwise, I think you're going to be hearing a lot about drought this year, more so than you have in previous years, and not just in the West, other parts of the country as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that drought also has an influence on temperatures. The drier the ground gets, I remember the summer of 2011 in Texas in particular, where you had the combination of bad drought and above normal temperatures. But it was the drought that was making it even hotter, because then that sun hit that hard baked ground that hadn't had rain in so long. Like the models just were underdoing the temperatures. The models come out with a forecast that said the high would be 98, and you could almost guarantee that it was going to be a couple degrees higher than that, because the models weren't taking into account how dry the ground was. And it almost becomes like a blacktop surface, even just regular ground, and actually causes the temperatures to be even higher. So this is terrible cycle where you want some relief from the heat, but the only hope is more rain in order to cool the temperatures down too. So, I mean, oftentimes the two go hand in hand, drought and above normal temperatures. And yeah, I think we're going to see more of that, it looks like.
That's the interesting thing about drought, is that we have an expression, drought begets drought. You get this feedback loop almost, where you just get dry weather, you dry out the soils more, you get really hot weather, you dry out the soils more, and anytime any sort of trigger can come to potentially end the drought, it ends up getting dried up because the atmosphere in this area is so dry. So that's why we're definitely hoping to get the soils a little bit wetter here over the next week or so, to kind of buy us a little bit more time going into the first part of summer. It definitely looked a little scary here this month with how hot it's been down in Texas.
Hey, here in Jersey, we were in moderate drought for about 7 weeks in March and April. And that's, you don't want to be in drought going into summer. Now, thankfully, we had a lot of rain from about mid-April onward, but there was some concern, what happens when you go into the summer with this. And we haven't had, and I'll transition into Matt's upbringing here, but we haven't had a significant drought in New Jersey since 2002. Now, Matt, growing up in New Jersey, do you remember that? Do you remember that back in 2002?
I want to say that I might actually, because I think there was a wildfire in the Pinelands that year. And I remember the smoke plume from the Pinelands fire in the parking lot. If not, it was around then. So yeah, vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that too. I remember being at the shore. We were on vacation, and my dad going back to where my parents lived, and in Union, which is not by the coast, but anyway, went inland, said he didn't even cut the lawn because it was just brown everywhere. It was just that crazy. So anyway, so Matt, like I said, cat's out of the bag. You're from New Jersey, so am I. You went to Rutgers, I did too. But just tell us how you got interested in weather. I think if you asked 10 meteorologists how long you want to be interested in weather, I would say 7 would say since before middle school. Were you one of those people too?
Absolutely. I was probably about 3 or 4 when I guess the seed got planted. I mean, you don't know what you want to do when you're 3 or 4, but I knew that I liked weather at that point. And so I would have been 3 in the summer of 1985, which was Hurricane Gloria that came up the East Coast. And all I remember is just, my grandmother lived on Absecon Island. So we had to bring her in, because however the storm was hyped up then. And my dad was taping windows, which I don't think is necessarily a best practice, but at that point in time, it was what we did. And so just kind of getting through that, I think did something. And then I really had a love for maps. And so like when you got the Weather Channel, you see stuff on the maps. That's pretty cool. So I just it just grew on me. I mean, I gave a weather report to my kindergarten class. So it was by kindergarten, it was established that I was going to be a meteorologist. So yeah.
I think it's another similarity with this, Matt, too, because I was like 3 or 4 too. I was always interested in weather. Some people usually have like a certain event that hooks them in, but it sounds like that was. Are you saying Gloria was the case for you? You're saying you even before Gloria.
When I write my biography, that'll be the story I tell. It was Hurricane Gloria.
Okay. All right. Well, let us know when that book comes out. We'll have you come back on the podcast, talk about it.
Reign of Error.
Matt and Sean, was there a specific event that got you guys interested in weather, or was it just kind of a thing for you?
I think I'd always had interest in weather. As a kid, I was the one that was always standing in the garage looking out at the thunderstorms. My parents were having to hold me back. But I would say the one thing that triggered me, especially for broadcast meteorology, was Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And really that whole epic hurricane season, I was one after another. And the weather coverage was just weather was the big story for the August and September of that year. And that was all what the news was focused on, was what happened with Hurricane Katrina and then the following storms that year. So I think that's when I realized, like, hey, I want to be a part of this coverage and trying to get these forecasts out and prevent a situation, hopefully, from another Hurricane Katrina happening, because it was a situation where a lot of people just didn't get out of the way. And there were multiple reasons why that was the case. But like, in order to improve the messaging and be a part of that process, like that was the moment that Hurricane Katrina was what convinced me that I wanted to be in the broadcast meteorology field specifically.
Yeah. And for me, I go back a little bit before you guys. I was a little kid in the 70s in Virginia, but it was colder in the 70s for a lot of the eastern U.S. And there was a fair amount of snow, even in Richmond in the 1970s in those winters. So that kind of started to get my interest. I kind of remember it being more snow than it actually was. I mean, you know how it is as you look back at the data, like, wow, I thought it was a lot more than that, and it really wasn't. But those kinds of things started getting me interested, and I was a classical geek in school anyway, fascinated with astronomy and meteorology, anything that was up in the sky. But frankly, at the time when I was a younger guy, I had no idea how to make any money as an astronomer. So like, well, I see these folks on television talking about the weather, so that's a job. So I kind of started going in that direction. Ironically, I thought I ended up working for the Weather Service when I was an undergrad, but ended up going in a different direction. But it's good. Weather communications is very gratifying, helping educate people about what's going on in the atmosphere, what they should expect, what they shouldn't expect, and what to prepare for. It's very, very gratifying. I think each one of us at some point has had somebody thank them immensely that it helped them out. I've had people tell me that I've saved their lives, which is amazing. So it goes back a long time. But again, as you guys know, everybody has a little different reason for getting into it.
And, like you, Sean, Matt Lanza, he started in broadcast and now working, with Cheniere, but also in digital. So Matt, tell us what it was like, getting into broadcast, because you went to Rutgers and then you were part of the Weather Watcher program there at Rutgers at the time. Got to shout it out while we're here.
Yeah.
But then you did a couple of stints in broadcast.
Much like, Sean sort of described me, like I wasn't entirely sure which direction I wanted to go into. I just knew that I wanted to get into it. So I sort of was approaching things with an open mind out of graduation and decided that, all right, well, I'll start with TV and see how that goes. Because I'd had an internship at TV40 in South Jersey.
Yes.
Back when it was still doing the news. And the person I worked with at the time, she left midway through my internship, and they're like, hey, you want to do the weather? And I'm like, sure. Okay, why not? And so I did it for like the last 2 weeks of the internship. And it was amazing. Like,
that must have been so cool. Oh my God.
It's like your hometown and you're going into your senior year and you're just like, oh, wow, this is wild. But I think that probably helped sort of spur me on. I got some pretty positive feedback after that. So I was like, all right, well, I'll pursue TV. And I started up in Syracuse, working for a station up there part-time. They needed basically just morning weather producing a few days a week. So I did that, and I worked at a Barnes & Noble on the side. It was a good experience. I actually had a very good person that I worked with up there, Dave Longley, who's still actually at that same station, News Channel 9 in Syracuse, and just taught me a lot about, you have sort of this ideal coming out of school that, like, I am a communicator, I'm a scientist, I'm going to talk to you about the weather, and just seeing how he did it and learning from him really sort of set me on the idea that, yes, that's part of it, but it's more important to explain to people how it's going to impact them and what matters and what to take seriously and whatnot. So that was a good experience. But obviously I wanted a full-time job, so I moved down the road to Utica about a year after I started in Syracuse, and worked for WKTV up there and stayed there for about 4.5 years. And it was a good experience. Lots of snow, made up for all those times being on the wrong side of the rain snow line with lake effect, which is fantastically fun to forecast. One of the best forecasting challenges I've ever had is lake effect snow. And yeah, I just, it was fun while I was there. I enjoyed it, but decided after a little while that I wanted something different. And that's what kind of got me into the energy industry.
Yeah. So like, did you know you wanted to go into energy at that point, or were you just looking to get out of broadcast?
It was a little bit of impatience, not getting a lot of good leads in broadcasting at that point in time. But I also had a friend that was doing energy meteorology. I saw what he was doing. I was like, this is pretty cool. I wouldn't mind doing this. And I had actually, one of the other internships I did at Rutgers was we did a pilot project with PSE&G in central northern Jersey. And we basically were helping them with thunderstorm forecasting so they could pre-place power crews ahead of thunderstorms. And I kind of lost a lot of that after starting in TV, but I sort of harkened back to it when I decided that it was time to make a change. And it seemed like a more interesting option. I had delved a little bit into weather blogging when it was new at the time in Utica. And what I would do in the blogs a lot of times is just sort of speculate on stuff beyond day 7 a little bit. And I think sort of that longer range forecasting mentality is what helped me get into energy a little bit more, where it's not so much the next 5 days that matters, but it's the 10 to 20 days from now that really is important to folks in the energy industry.
Yeah. And that's great, because we actually want to talk a little bit more about that, but we got to cut the break. So we're going to take a brief break. We'll come back on the other side. We're going to talk about energy forecasting. We're going to talk about digital meteorology. We'll talk about Matt Lanza a little bit more here in the Across the Sky podcast. Welcome back, everybody, to the Across the Sky podcast, your Lee Enterprises national weather podcast. New episodes come out every Monday. You can check that out on whatever your favorite news site is. So we are here with Matt Lanza here. He is the lead meteorologist for Cheniere Energy in Houston, Texas. Also works for Space City Weather, which is also in Houston as well. So the second half, we're going to kind of split up our time, talk first about energy meteorology, and then we'll talk about his time in digital. And Matt, there's still a lot of people who are probably listening and not even familiar that energy companies would have meteorologists. So just start at the 101 level. What are you doing every day that requires Cheniere to have a meteorologist? Tell us about the important work that you're doing.
You turn on your air conditioning, you turn on your heat in the wintertime and the summertime, and that requires energy, either electricity or natural gas or whatever. So based on the weather, that determines how many people are going to be turning on their air conditioning and their heat and where. And so it helps energy companies to have expertise on staff to basically help them cut through the noise when they really want to have a good view on what energy demand is going to look like across the United States or anywhere for that matter. It's become more of a global industry in the time that I've been within the industry, starting in 2009. It's not just America that matters. It's Europe, it's Asia, it's South America, and it's everything. And with the advent of renewables in the last 15 or 20 years, you need to know how much wind power is going to be available on a given day. You need to know how much solar power is going to be available on a given day. Hydropower, so things like drought are important, especially in the West. All these things play into it, and all those things dictate ultimately the price of electricity, the price of natural gas. And this is not like gas that you go to the gas pump and get, right? This is the gas that you heat your homes with. So it's a different sort of thing. And anytime you want to have that expertise, you want to bring somebody in-house. There's a lot of companies that'll do forecasting to help out, third parties that not every energy company can afford to hire a meteorologist, so they rely on those services for that. But to get that highly specialized view on things, there are some companies that will hire, and that's fortunately why I'm where I am right now. And what I bring to the table sort of is obviously the experience that I have and the view on things and the way to communicate it. Having worked in television, I consider myself to be a pretty good communicator. That's very important as well, because when you're trading things on any sort of exchange, you need to have good information, quick information, understandable information. So that's kind of where I come in that regard. So it's a lot of fun because it's forecasting not just in the near term, it's also 10, 15, 20 days out. It's seasonal forecasting. It's hurricane forecasting, so it covers a lot of the things that I'm really interested in as a forecaster to tackle.
I'm curious, for a broadcast meteorologist, the big thing for us is severe weather and getting the information out about severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, of course, hurricanes. But I'm curious, in the energy sector, what is it like covering severe weather? Because I know that obviously has an impact on the energy sector and the power outages it can cause. What is it like covering severe storms in the energy sector? And what is kind of unique about that versus the broadcast meteorology world? And what does the energy company specifically want to know when it comes to severe weather?
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. So every place you go is going to be different. Where I am, we deal more in natural gas. So the severe weather aspect of things doesn't impact us quite as much. But where I was prior to being here, when I worked at Southern California Edison out in Los Angeles, that's the major utility for most of the Los Angeles area. And, they would care about if severe weather is going to knock out power to a chunk of the region. So they can understand where to pre-place power crews to go and restore power quickly. So it's more it's less about the broad brushing of when severe weather is going to happen, and more like, hey, I need you to be as specific as you possibly can about this stuff to try and figure it out. So from that respect, it's actually very, very interesting to forecast, because you have to get down almost that micro scale to kind of help them out and to understand how it will impact them. And now forecasting in the West is way different than it was when I was there, because of wildfires being such a big deal. That's a huge, huge concern for Western utilities when the wind is going to be strong and things like that, because they need to preemptively shut off power to certain lines. They need to know where that's going to happen to do things like that. So from a day-to-day perspective, it's a lot different. There's also the aspect of keeping your workforce safe. That has become more of a focus. It definitely became more of a focus for us after Hurricane Harvey down in Houston. And, what I will get questions now from people asking me, hey, do we need to tell people to leave work early because there's going to be flooding rains at rush hour or something like that? So there's a lot more of this ad hoc stuff of keeping your workforce safe and trying to make sure that people, get from point A to point B safely. And, from that respect, it's very similar to TV, right? You're just trying to keep people safe and informed and get them off the roads and out of harm's way as quickly as possible. So every shop is different for what they need, but you get a little bit of everything within the industry, and those same skills definitely do cross over into the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm totally in agreement there, Matt. It's getting to be more and more decision support, I think, is the popular term. What do the people who need to make these kinds of calls need to know? And I think that is becoming more and more critical, so that we as meteorologists can get the critical information that we know to the people who have to make these big decisions. Because I think we've all seen decisions happen where we just shake our heads and go, why did they do that? We all knew the weather was going to do X or it was going to do Y. Why did this person in this state, and we're not picking on any one person here, but we've all seen it in each of our different regions and in all different regions across the country. So I know that's a frustration for all of us, and that's something we want to improve on. Dovetailing on that, Matt, I don't want to put you on the spot, but so much, but I do want to tackle a couple quickie things here since I got you. One, I think I've heard you mention, and you alluded to this before, that since Harvey, there is much more of an acute awareness, or I don't want to say PTSD about flooding, but it's certainly a different feel in the community than it was whenever there was rain since before Harvey. And two, and this is an opportunity for you if you would like, we had the very cold stuff in Texas about in February of say this is 2022, so 21. I'm getting old. All the years run together. So we had that massive cold outbreak, of course, in Texas. So one, talk about the Harvey thing, and two, what kind of misconceptions did you run up against and feel like you had to repeatedly correct regarding weather and energy when there was that massive cold outbreak in Texas?
Yeah, so it's definitely a couple things. And actually, they're both sort of tied together. If we're really being honest, is that, it's not just the flooding that's been bad down here. It's been everything else that we've had to deal with. We are a very disaster prone place. At least we have been in recent years. So everybody suffers from some kind of trauma from it. For me as a meteorologist, 25 years from now, I can tell you about my career before Harvey, after Harvey. That was a complete turning point for me as a forecaster, as a person, as what I, as somebody who enjoys weather, what I actually enjoy versus what I thought I enjoyed. They're very different things now. I don't like bad weather as much as I used to. It's not as exciting to me because I know firsthand what the human element is. So the community down here is very, very on edge, even still today. It's still one of the top issues. I think there was a poll that was conducted last year, and flooding was still one of the top issues in Houston. And so, people very much care about it. And anytime there is rain down here, we do start to get questions, and you do feel the tension start to build up a little bit. So you're expecting those questions. And with the freeze last year, that was a whole different dimension of things that was just fascinating to watch how people handled. We had the county judge down here in Harris County ahead of the freeze basically said, this is going to be the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane hitting us. So there was no reason that anybody shouldn't have been prepared for this, or at least within reason. It shouldn't have been understood that it wasn't going to happen. We knew it was going to happen. We didn't know that the human element of it was going to be so bad, because that was things that we don't forecast, right? But now, even today, when you mention cold fronts, people start to tense up because they recognize what happened that February, and they think, oh, cold front, does that mean it's going to get really, really cold? And you have to explain to them, well, no, this is just a regular cold front sort of deal. So there's a lot of layers to it. The thing that I think we struggled with after, and still struggle with to some extent, and that sort of misconception is, I think the outside conception of Texas is two things. Number one, it's wind power failed, which it didn't. And number two, it's that, Texas cut themselves off from the rest of the country because they wanted to go their own way and do their own thing. And that's that. So they kind of brought this on themselves. And yes, to a point, but no, not really. It's still an energy grid. It's still a functioning energy grid. It has similar problems to other energy grids in the country. And if you think that this can't happen in the Midwest or the Northeast or the Southeast, think again, because it absolutely could. If you have the wrong kind of weather, that could happen. This is not just something that is unique to Texas. Everybody's got power grids and aging infrastructure that needs to be replaced and repaired. So, what I would want people to understand about Texas is that it's complicated. It is a very, very multi-layered, complex issue that involves everything from infrastructure that's aging, to how we run our grid, to weatherization and winterization of power plants, to renewables and how they operate, to just how we get that energy from one part of the state to the other. It's a very complex issue. So, if you're outside Texas and listening to this, it's more complex than anybody leads it on. I always like to say that, nuance is dead in the world of social media sometimes. And the reality is that this is a very nuanced story.
Yeah. Of course, the whole country was following that. And like you said, talking to people about impacts. You did that in two different ways, though, right? You did that with Chenier, you did that with Space City Weather. And I want to transition to that because you are, when we look back in history, when the history books are written on media and meteorology, I think you'll have at least a paragraph, if not maybe a whole chapter about what you're doing as one of the pioneers that really created these big digital websites that are tracking, whether it's for a city or for the country or whatever have you. So we wanted to chat with you partially because we're kind of doing the same thing you're doing. We're working in the digital space. We are informing people of the weather. We're also talking about the weather more than just a forecast here. So, you said your blogging days in Utica kind of helped you with Chenier, but I'm imagining it had to also spark the seed for getting as involved with Space City Weather as you are.
Yeah, 100%. And that's sort of the thing is like, we started this whole idea of weather blogging. Our chief meteorologist at the time in Utica, Amanda Gabler, came, sort of had the idea, and we sort of leveled with each other. We're on the same page, like, yeah, let's do this. Because blogging had just started at that point and was becoming a thing. Like, well, why not have a weather blog? So that's what we did. And in doing that, it became popular to a point. You need a little bit more promotion for it and things like that. But it worked out pretty well for what it was. So when, I came to Houston and I got connected with Eric Berger, who was the science writer at the Houston Chronicle at the time, and was looking for a little bit of help with their weather blog. I was like, sure, I'll do it. I enjoy writing about weather. I did this in Utica. I kind of miss doing it. It's a nice space to engage with people and communicate weather in a different way. And, not to get too editorial here, but to be honest with you, when the world transitioned to the internet world, I don't necessarily know that TV stations did a great job with that transition and fully appreciating how serious it was and how significant it was. And honestly, I feel like, newspapers and the newspaper industry has done a better job adapting to that. Maybe it's just natural that way, but like what you guys are doing at Lee Enterprises is phenomenal, because it's that sort of thing that now people are consuming their information multiple different ways. They want it. They want to find you on different social media platforms, but one person uses Instagram, one person uses Twitter, one person uses Facebook, one person just wants to look at a weather app and all this stuff. So you're catering to this audience that's now completely fragmented. And I think what we had some success with here in Houston was, Eric had a good base audience from his time at the Houston Chronicle, but what would happen during Harvey was people were hiding in their closets from tornado warnings and in flash flood warnings, and they had no way of getting information other than on their phone, in their closets, in their bathrooms or whatever. And with all these neighborhood groups on Facebook and Nextdoor, they were like, hey, have you seen what these guys are doing? And it would be passed on to them like that. And that was one of the things that really helped us to grow in size and in some sort of prominence. And it's just been kind of fascinating to watch how that's changed. And like, I don't think we're necessarily doing anything that is that innovative so much as just adapting to the times that we live in and how people consume information, and trying to meet them where they are and do it with a sense of personality. So we're real and with empathy, because we know how snake bitten people have been in the Houston area.
Yeah, if you could talk more about what it was like covering Harvey for Space City Weather and some of the feedback that you've gotten from being in the digital realm. Why do people come to you? More and more people started to come to you during Harvey because of your coverage there. And so what's some of the feedback that you got from that and since then about why people go to your site and come to you for weather information versus other places?
Yeah, we like to tell people that we want to be boring 90% of the time. We want to just be kind of mundane, and here's what the weather is going to be. There's something happening that you need to be aware of. So what we've done is we've essentially trained our audience to understand that we're not going to hype things up unless it's necessary, which runs a little counter to how I think TV media operates in a sense. So we've taken on this whole no hype, no drama thing. It's sometimes a little bit, I think, unfair to broadcast meteorologists who are just operating in the space that they operate in. They operate in that environment. They do a great job. The ones that we have here in Houston are fantastic. They're good people, they're good forecasters, and they communicate info very well. But because of how the media landscape has changed and how people's opinions on media have changed, this works better in building trust to some extent, I think, with a certain amount of the audience, because this is how they want to consume their information. They don't want to be drawn to your website every single day to just get this eye-popping stuff when it's just kind of not really impactful. They want to know how something significant is going to impact them. And we've done a few things to kind of help with that. Like I said, we try to be boring and we only dial it up when we need to. We have developed a flood scale now on a scale of 1 to 5 that we did with a little bit of research back in the previous flooding events, how many homes flooded, things like that. So now whenever we get a rain event, we can come out there and say, hey, we think this is going to be a stage 2 out of 5 event. And people will be like, oh, okay, I know what that means. I can go consult what their little chart says. Street flooding, probably a good idea to stay home. Maybe there's going to be a little bayou flooding and stuff like that. And people really like that because it contextualizes, what a rain event's going to be. It doesn't have them thinking that every rain event's going to be a Harvey, because that's what a lot of people were worried about, and understandably so. When you've had that happen, and we had the floods before Harvey too. So some people flooded 3 times in 3 years. And so they want that context. We also bring empathy to the table. We talk to you like you're a human, and we talk like we're humans. And we get it. We know what you're going through, and we'll walk you through it. We'll hold your hand through it as best we can. I think it just really resonates with people when you're human, that you're not just putting on an act for whatever you're doing. So, I think that's really what's worked for us. Harvey was frenetic. As you can imagine, it was just day after day of a lot of flooding and dealing with reporting it and helping people see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I was up in Dallas for work, so it was not easy to coordinate, but we made it work. And the best thing I saw after Harvey was a comment. I didn't read a lot of comments because I couldn't, but a comment from someone that said, when I saw that you guys were starting to hype Harvey up, I moved a whole bunch of stuff out of my bottom floor, moved it up to the top floor that was valuable to me, and the bottom floor flooded. So thank you for that. And that just really hit me. Like, that's why we do it. All right. That's what we're doing this for. And so, more stories like that are good.
Yeah, for sure. This is one of the things I think a lot of us working in the weather forecasting space have seen, especially since the time of Harvey, is trying to raise awareness about freshwater, flash flooding, that kind of thing. So I know the Weather Prediction Center, that's NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, DC, the WPC, Weather Prediction Center. We know how the acronyms get. They put out, a national, I don't want to say flood alert, but kind of like the Storm Prediction Center does these outlooks about how bad severe weather is. They now do outlooks for how bad flooding can get. And so they have that tiered all the way up to high impact or high risk. Did you kind of take a page from that, developing your scale there in Houston? And I'm going to assume that it is very southeastern Texas specific for the impacts there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it sounds like you've had success with that. And how much, if at all, has that kind of dovetailed with those kind of flood outlook risks that are put out by the Weather Prediction Center nationwide in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I think that so we came up with the scale after Tropical Storm Imelda, actually, which a lot of people forget about, but dumped over 40 inches of rain just east of Houston. I mean, if Harvey never happened, Imelda would have been a huge story because it came close to flooding Houston again, and in some parts of the area did flood again from that. But it was at that point that we said, look, we really need something to compare these storms to, because there's just too many of them now. We have to get people grounded ahead of these events. So it was that sort of idea that, yes, we felt that a tiered scale would work best. I initially didn't want to do it internally because I've always had heartburn about doing stuff that is sort of rogue from what the National Weather Service is doing, because I don't want the message to get conflated in any way. And so what we did was we came up with it. We just decided, all right, we're going to do it. And then the National Weather Service actually reached out to us, our local office, and said, hey, we're doing something similar for our partners, which is basically just emergency management, media, et cetera, where they have a tiered system ahead of rain events. And so we just want to make sure that we're on the same page, and it worked really well that we could talk to them. We adjusted some of our things a little bit just to get more in line with them. And it just works, kumbaya, everybody's happy. And so, but we really wanted to make it local. We didn't want to necessarily make it so you could take it in Minneapolis and adapt it. You could do something like that in Minneapolis, sure. But for us, specific to what we deal with down here, we wanted to have something that was very localized. And I think you're seeing more of that elsewhere. I saw recently a TV station in Sacramento is doing that ahead of wildfire days to kind of help people understand where the risk is relative to normal, just so people have a baseline to go off of. So we really like the idea of doing it, and it's helped for our audience. I don't know that it would work for every audience, but it's worked for ours, and for that we're happy.
Good stuff, Matt. Yeah, working with the Weather Service, of course, is good to stay on the same page. And you want consistent messaging, right? I think we all, even though we're all different meteorologists, and sometimes we're competing against each other, we want to keep our messaging consistent. So that's certainly a help with that. Matt, that is all the time we have, unfortunately, but this was great. I mean, I think we talked for about 40 minutes and felt like it kind of flew by. So, thanks so much for chatting and talking about your life, talking about Cheniere, Space City Weather, and how you're really helping people out in Texas with your website here. Where can we find you? Social media, website? Where can we see everything Matt Lanza?
Yeah, right. So spacecityweather.com is the website. We also have an app if you care about Houston weather that much. You can just search Space City Weather and you can find that. I am on Twitter at Matt Lanza. And our Space City Weather is also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I think we're on TikTok now too. I don't do that.
Wow.
But Eric, I think it's Eric's daughter that's running that one. So
I'm gonna look this up right now while you're talking to me. Look at this. Space City Weather, TikTok.
Why not? Right. Like I said, we want to meet people where they are. So
no, you're right. Hey, listen, no, that's great. Well, Matt, hey, thanks again for coming on the pod. We appreciate it. I hope everybody here who's listening got to soak in some of what Matt was saying. But thanks a lot, man, for the time. We appreciate it. And happy early birthday to you as well.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks a lot for having me on, guys. It's good talking to you. And thanks for what y'all are doing, too. You're doing good work.
An important message from Blue Ridge Hospice. There may be several hospices now claiming to serve the area, but Blue Ridge Hospice is the only local hospice that has been serving here for 40 plus years, operates the only hospice inpatient care center, conducts the only community-wide grief and bereavement programs, offers a nationally recognized music therapy program in conjunction with Shenandoah University, outscores every other Virginia hospice in Medicare's quality scores, and so much more. Blue Ridge Hospice, the first, the best. Find out more at blueridgehospice.org.
Big shout out to my fellow Jersey guy here, Matt Lanza, for hopping on the podcast. You could talk with him for a long time. I mean, and he has a wealth of information. I mean, we covered 3 different topics. Usually we've been just covering kind of one topic, but we were able to do 3 with him, which is great. And, what he's doing in Space City Weather is, like I said, kind of similar to what we're doing. Being digital natives and really working to talk to you guys. And this podcast is one of the reasons that we're doing this and why we're doing it.
Yeah, no, what struck to me was, when we started talking about flooding in Harvey, and just how incredible that storm was and the rainfall totals that came out of it. And, just and it was interesting hearing him talk about the flood scale that they developed, because flooding is becoming a bigger issue in so many parts of the country, just becoming more common. We're just getting more of these heavy rain events. And I kind of have a similar background to his, being in the Rio Grande Valley, kind of similar climates, very hot and humid, and there can be long dry spells, but suddenly interrupted by these big rain events. And there were a couple of big ones when I was in the Valley. And again, becoming more common, and just the impact that you see when there is a big flood event and how it can just absolutely devastate people's lives when their home literally gets flooded and inundated, everything they own almost ruined. So, I mean, I think it's just a conversation that needs to happen going forward. Is just how can we get better prepared for what's becoming these more frequent big flood events? How can we better protect ourselves? How can we improve the messaging for those? And so I think it's interesting him coming up with this flood scale, and there might be something to that as far as discussing the threat, because again, not every threat is the same, but when there's a big threat and those are becoming more common, it's good to get the message out there so people are prepared.
Yeah, and that is the challenge, right? Because so many times, even when you've got a larger scale flash flooding event, let's say from an Ida last year, we know what it did in southeastern Pennsylvania through New Jersey and into New York City. We all knew that they were going to get flooding. We didn't know precisely, was it going to be between 3 and 4? Is it going to be between 4 and 6? 12 hours ahead of that, you don't have that precise of a feel. It's coming, it's going to be bad. Unfortunately, people still, we're sometimes victims of our own success. We know this much is going to happen. We can't take it. We can't drill it down to the 1 hour level just yet until we start to see those rain bands really start to take hold. And then, it's upon all of us, especially local to our areas, who understand our geographies better than people at outside organizations, to know where the threats are going to multiply most quickly. Joe, that in South Jersey, I know the areas here across metropolitan Richmond that will flood. I have a better understanding of the Chesapeake Bay than somebody maybe does in Kansas. So getting that messaging out is so key. And I was talking to some other folks about this as we get into tropical season, that we rightly talk a lot about the wind. Right? It's a category 3, the winds are this. It's category 4, the winds are this. And we need to keep doing that. But, we also really need to continue to remind people, just because it goes to a Cat 1 or it's a tropical storm, doesn't mean that it's no longer a threat, especially when the forward speed goes down, that these things put down phenomenal amounts of water away from the coastline. And as we have more people living in more areas and more flood prone areas, and oh, by the way, the planet's also warming, so you can evaporate more water into the atmosphere anyway, this kind of thing is going to become more and more impactful to people. So I think what Matt says is spot on. We need to figure out a way to remind people that flooding is very, very important.
Yeah. Similar for hurricanes, right? It's not always, like you said, the wind, it's the water, as you mentioned.
Exactly.
I like their scale. I mean, and I think that's actually a great tool for Space City Weather because, let's just say from a business side, it gets more people to follow them and they're giving accurate information. They developed something that people can think, oh, Space City Weather, they have this flooding chart. So that's a great correlation that they made here. All right, guys. Well, I guess this is it. It is the guys only episode of the Across the Sky podcast. We're going to have Kirsten back next week here. We're excited to have her back, and we're going to have another guest for you. So be sure to tune on in as we get into Memorial Day weekend. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Take care, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Make a difference. Relish a great work-life balance. Enjoy generous benefits and competitive pay. Go home each night feeling fulfilled by your work. Work for an employer of choice. Work for Blue Ridge Hospice. We're always looking to hire compassionate RNs, CNAs, or anyone interested in office or thrift shop work. We've been your not-for-profit community hospice since 1981. Visit our website for more information or to apply today at blueridgehospice.org. That's blueridgehospice.org. Blue Ridge Hospice is an equal opportunity employer.